71 degrees below zero. At this temperature, exposed skin freezes in under a minute, and steel becomes as brittle as glass. But for 85-year-old Boris and Galina, the cold wasn't the only thing hunting them in the dark. When the lights went out, the eyes appeared, and they were hungry. The thermometer nailed to the rough-hewn logs of the outer wall didn't just drop, it plummeted. It read, "In the Oymyakon Valley of Yakutia, deep in the Siberian wilderness." Numbers like that weren't just weather reports, they were death sentences for the unprepared. The air was so cold it didn't just bite. It felt solid, a physical weight pressing against the chest, crystallizing the moisture in your nose instantly with a sharp, stinging crackle known locally as the whisper of the stars. Inside the small, weathered farmhouse, Galina stoked the cast-iron stove. At 85, she moved with a stiffness that had settled into her bones decades ago, but her hands were steady. She wrapped a thick wool shawl tighter around her shoulders, glancing at the frosted window. The ice on the inside of the glass was an inch thick, blocking out the twilight that passed for day this far north in January. "Boris should be back," she murmured, more to the old samovar hissing on the table than to anyone else. Sitting in the corner, bundled in 3 layers of thermal fleece and looking miserable, was Katya, 19 years old, with her dyed blonde hair tucked under a heavy fur hat. She looked out of place among the rusted tools and drying herbs. She had come from Yakutsk 3 days ago to check on them, guilt-tripped by her mother. "He's just checking the generator, Baba," Katya said, her voice muffled by a scarf she refused to take off. "The generator is coughing," Galina said, her eyes narrowing. "I heard it miss a beat. When the machine stops, the house dies." The door groaned open, bringing with it a cloud of dense, white fog that rolled across the floorboards like dry ice. Boris stepped in, kicking the snow off his heavy felt boots. Orvalenki, he was a mountain of a man. Even at his age, his face a map of deep crevasses earned from a lifetime of squinting against the blinding white sun. His beard was a solid block of ice. He didn't speak immediately. He aggressively rubbed his face with a rough cloth to bring the circulation back before the frostbite could set in. "The fuel line is freezing?" Galina asked, handing him a mug of boiling tea. Boris took the mug, his hands shaking slightly, not from age. Katya realized with a jolt, but from adrenaline. That terrified her. Boris never shook. "The fuel is fine," Boris said, his voice grave, sounding like grinding stones. "But the sheep are restless." Katya shifted, pulling her legs up onto the bench. Boris looked at his granddaughter, his blue eyes sharp and unblinking. "No, Katenka. Not dogs. The stride is too long. The paw prints are the size of dinner plates. It is the grey ghost pack." Galina crossed herself instinctively. "They are supposed to be deep in the taiga." "The taiga is empty," Boris said grimly. "The elk have moved south early. The wolves are starving. And when they starve, they stop fearing men." Suddenly, the hum of the generator outside, a sound so constant it was like the heartbeat of the house, sputtered. It gave a loud, metallic clank, whined, and then died. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the darkness. "The flashlight!" Boris barked, moving with surprising speed. Galina fumbled in the drawer, retrieving a heavy-duty torch. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating their breath, which was already becoming visible in the rapidly cooling air. Without the electric heaters boosting the stove, the temperature inside would drop to fatal levels within hours. "I have to go out and restart it," Boris said, grabbing his heavy sheepskin coat. He reached for the old double-barreled TOZ, 3-4 shotgun hanging above the door. He cracked it open to check the shells. "Katya, hold the light for me from the window. Do not step outside." "I'm coming with you," Katya said, surprised by her own voice. "No," Galina snapped. "You don't know the cold, child. I can hold the light better if I'm by the door," Katya argued, grabbing her flashlight. She wasn't going to sit in the dark while her 85-year-old grandfather went out into the frozen void. Boris hesitated, then nodded. "Stay on the porch." Only on the porch. They opened the door. The cold hit them like a physical blow, sucking the air from their lungs. It was 71 degrees Celsius. The world was a monochromatic nightmare of blue shadows and white drifts. Boris stepped off the porch, the snow crunching loudly under his boots. He moved toward the shed where the generator was housed, about 20 meters away. Katya stood in the doorway, the beam of her flashlight shaking as she tried to follow him. He reached the shed and yanked the cover off the engine. Katya watched him tug the starter cord. Once. Twice. Nothing. "Grandpa!" she yelled, her voice sounding thin in the vastness. Boris ignored her, bending down to inspect the casing. He stood up slowly, and even from this distance, Katya saw him stiffen. He turned back toward the house, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. "Get inside!" he roared. "Galina, bolt the door!" "What is it?" Katya screamed, freezing in place. "The line!" Boris shouted, backing away from the shed, raising the shotgun. It didn't freeze. It was chewed through. Before Katya could process the words, a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the woodpile. It was massive, grey-white, and moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. Then another shadow appeared on the roof of the shed. Then a third near the gate. Yellow eyes reflected the beam of Katya's flashlight. 1 pair. 2. 10. A howl tore through the silent night, not the lonely, melodic call of a movie wolf, but a guttural, jagged shriek that signaled the attack. Boris fired. The boom of the shotgun was deafening, the flash illuminating the snarling face of a wolf mid-leap. The beast yelped and spun away, but 3 more took its place. "Boris!" Galina screamed from inside the house. "Run, Katya!" Boris yelled, but he slipped on a patch of black ice. The pack surged forward. Katya didn't think. If she had thought, she would have slammed the door and locked it, obeying the primal instinct to survive. Instead, she launched herself off the porch. The cold burned her face, but the adrenaline masked the pain. She grabbed a splitting axe from the chopping block near the stairs. It was heavy. Too heavy for her city arms, but she dragged it with both hands. "Get away!" she screamed, swinging the axe wildly at the shapes closing in on her grandfather. The wolves were shocked. They expected prey to flee, not to charge. The closest wolf, a gaunt male with matted fur, snapped at her, his jaws clamping inches from her leg. Katya swung the handle of the axe, connecting with the beast's snout. It whined and backed off. Boris was scrambling to his knees, clutching his left arm. "The gun! Katya!" "Leave the axe!" Katya dropped the axe and dove for the shotgun lying in the snow. The metal barrel burned her bare hand. She had lost a glove in the scramble, searing her skin like a hot iron. She screamed but managed to toss the weapon to Boris. He caught it with his good hand, braced it against his hip, and fired the second barrel blindly into the mass of fur and teeth. The buckshot tore up the snow, spraying the pack with ice and debris. The noise and the flash bought them a second of hesitation. "To the barn!" Boris wheezed, grabbing Katya's coat. "The house is too cold without power. We need the stove in the livestock barn." The barn was 40 meters away, in the opposite direction of the house. It was a fortress of thick logs, where they kept the 20 prized sheep their livelihood, their food, their life. It had a wood-burning stove that Galina kept running day and night for the animals. "Galina!" Boris shouted toward the open door of the house. "Go to the barn! Run!" Galina appeared in the doorway, holding a flare gun, an old Soviet emergency pistol they kept for bears. She didn't run. She marched. She raised the pistol and fired. A red star hissed into the night, fizzing violently on the ground between them and the wolves, casting a blood-red light over the scene. The wolves scattered from the hissing flame. "Move!" Galina commanded, her voice cracking like a whip. The 3 of them stumbled through the knee-deep snow. The cold was already seeping through Katya's layers. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. Every breath was a struggle. They reached the heavy barn door. Boris threw his shoulder against it, sliding the heavy wooden latch. They fell inside, into the pungent warmth of hay and lanolin. Boris slammed the door shut and dropped the heavy locking bar into place, just as a heavy body slammed against the wood from the outside. The impact shook dust from the rafters. "Check the windows," Boris gasped, sliding down the wall to sit on a bale of hay. Galina rushed to the small, high windows, ensuring the shutters were secured. Katya stood in the center of the barn, her chest heaving, staring at her grandfather. "Grandpa, your arm," she whispered. Boris looked down. The sleeve of his sheepskin coat was torn, and blood was soaking the thick wool, dark and glistening. It wasn't a bite. When he had fallen, his arm had twisted unnaturally. Dislocated, Boris grunted through gritted teeth. Maybe fractured. and a few scratches. The sheep were bleating in panic, huddled in the far corner. The smell of fear was sharp. Outside, the scratching began. It sounded like dozens of knives carving into the wood. The wolves weren't leaving. They were testing the perimeter. They cut the power, Katya said, her voice trembling as she looked at the door. Wolves don't. They don't know how to cut power lines. Do they? Boris looked at Galina. The old woman was already tearing strips of cloth from an old sheet to bind his arm. It wasn't an accident, Boris said softly. This is an alpha who has hunted men before. He knows the generator makes the noise and the light. He killed the noise. We are trapped, Katya said, the reality sinking in. No cell service, no power. And it's 71 degrees outside. We have the stove, Galina said firmly, tightening the bandage until Boris groaned. We have the sheep. We have wood. And we have 3 shells left for the shotgun, Boris added, checking his pockets. He looked up at the high window where a snout was sniffing at the cracks. And there are at least 15 of them. Suddenly, a massive crash shook the roof. Dust and straw rained down on them. They're on the roof, Katya whispered, looking up. The thatch, Boris cursed. The roof is timber and thatch. If they dig through, another crash. Then the sound of tearing. Katya, Boris said, his voice changing, losing the grandfatherly warmth and becoming the voice of a man who had survived the Siberian wilds for 8 decades. I can't aim with this arm. He held out the shotgun. Katya stared at the weapon. I've never fired a gun. I play piano, Grandpa. Tonight you play the gun, Boris said, shoving it into her hands. Or we all freeze. Or we get eaten. Those are the choices. Above them, the scratching turned into a frenzied digging. A paw broke through the thatch, debris falling onto the back of a terrified sheep. The sheep bolted, knocking over a lantern. Fire! Galina shouted, stomping out the sparks before the straw could catch. They're coming through the roof, Katya screamed. Let them come, Boris said, pulling a long, rusted pitchfork from the wall. They can only come one at a time through the hole. We kill them as they drop. And when the hole gets bigger? Katya asked, gripping the cold steel of the shotgun so hard her knuckles turned white. Boris looked at her, his eyes filled with a grim, terrible love. Then we fight with knives. But we do not die today. Not today. A chunk of the roof gave way. A shower of snow fell into the barn, bringing the temperature down instantly, and with the snow came the first wolf, dropping 10 feet to the floor, landing with a snarl, eyes locking instantly onto the sheep. It crouched to spring. Shoot! Boris roared. The shotgun didn't just fire. It exploded in Katya's hands. She hadn't braced herself properly. The stock of the TOZ, 3-4, slammed into her ribs, knocking the wind out of her, while the barrel jerked violently upward. But the spread of the buckshot at such close range was unforgiving. The wolf, mid-air and jaws open, took the full force of the blast in the chest. It didn't even whimper. The kinetic energy arrested its leap, slamming the beast backward into the hay where it twitched once and went still. Break it open! Boris shouted, his voice tight with pain. Reload! Fast! Katya scrambled to her feet, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped the gun again. The empty shell ejected with a smoking hiss, landing in the frozen straw. She dug into her pocket for one of the 2 remaining shells. Another one! Galina screamed, swinging a heavy iron shovel. A second wolf had dropped through the widening hole in the roof, landing on the back of a panic-stricken ewe. The sheep collapsed under the predator's weight. The wolf tore at the wool, but Galina, 5 feet tall and 85 years old, charged. She didn't have the strength to kill, but she had the fury of a woman protecting her family. She brought the flat of the shovel down on the wolf's hindquarters. The wolf snarled, abandoning the sheep and turning on Galina. It crouched, muscles coiling. Grandpa! Katya shrieked, snapping the shotgun closed. But she couldn't shoot. Galina was in the line of fire. Boris didn't hesitate. Ignoring his shattered arm, he lunged forward with the pitchfork. He drove the tines into the wolf's flank, using his body weight to pin the animal against the log wall. The wolf thrashed, snapping its jaws inches from Boris's face. Now, Katya! Boris roared, struggling to hold the beast. Shoot it! I'll hit you. Shoot! Katya stepped closer, the smell of gunpowder and wet fur choking her. She aimed for the head, prayed and pulled the trigger. The barn went silent, save for the ringing in their ears. 2 dead wolves lay on the floor. But the victory was short-lived. The hole in the roof was now a gaping wound. 4 feet wide, the heat from the stove was being sucked out, replaced by a column of air so cold it instantly fogged the room. The temperature in the barn dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The stove, Galina coughed, pointing. During the struggle, the sheep had stampeded. They had knocked the stovepipe loose. Smoke was now pouring into the barn, thick and acrid, while the fire inside the iron belly began to die without the draft. "We can't fix it," Boris rasped, leaning heavily against the wall, his face ashen. The adrenaline was fading, and the shock of his injury was setting in. "We have no heat, and they are still up there." Above them, the scratching stopped. For a moment, Katya thought they had won. Then, a deep, rhythmic thumping began on the roof. "They aren't digging," Katya whispered. "What are they doing?" "They are jumping," Boris said, his eyes closing. "They are throwing their weight against the weak timber. They are breaking the beams." Crack. A main rafter splintered. The roof sagged. "They know," Galina realized, horror dawning on her face. "The Alpha knows the structure is weak. We have to move," Boris said, forcing his eyes open. "The root cellar." "The cellar?" Katya looked at the trapdoor in the center of the barn floor, covered in straw. "It's just a hole in the ground, Grandpa. It's freezing." "It has a heavy door," Boris insisted. "And it is underground. The ground stays at -10, even when the air is -70. It is warmer than the barn will be in 5 minutes, and they cannot dig through the floor." Another rafter snapped. A shower of snow and wood splinters rained down. "Go," Boris commanded. Galina and Katya cleared the straw and heaved the heavy trapdoor open. A dark, earthy smell wafted up. It was a small storage pit, barely 5 feet deep, lined with wood, filled with potatoes and jars of pickled beets. "Get the sheep," Galina said. "We can't," Boris said, his voice breaking. Katya looked at the sheep the flock her grandparents had raised by hand. They were huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror. "We can't leave them," Katya cried. "We have no choice, Katenka," Galina said, tears freezing on her cheeks. They lowered Boris down first. He groaned as his broken arm bumped the ladder. Galina followed. Katya stood at the edge, looking up at the roof one last time. A massive grey head peered through the hole in the thatch. The Alpha. It looked directly at her, its eyes intelligent, ancient, and cruel. It didn't growl. Katya scrambled down the ladder and slammed the heavy wooden trapdoor shut above her. She threw the iron bolt just as the barn roof gave way completely. The world above them ended with a crash that shook the earth. In the cramped darkness of the root cellar, the noise was muffled but terrifying. The sound of timber snapping, the thud of heavy bodies hitting the floorboards above. Then, the screams of the animals stopped, replaced by the wet sounds of feeding. Katya sat in the dirt, her knees pulled to her chest, pressing her hands over her ears. The only light came from the tiny cracks in the floorboards above, where slivers of moonlight cut through the dust. Is it over?" she whispered, after a long time. "No." Boris's voice came from the dark, weak, and thready. "They will smell us. They will try to get through the floor." Galina was busy. Katya could hear her shuffling in the dark. A match flared, blindingly bright. Galina lit a small nub of a candle she had found on a shelf. The tiny flame illuminated their prison. It was a grave. That was Katya's first thought. The walls were frozen dirt. The air was stale. Boris was slumped against a sack of potatoes, his skin pale and clammy. His eyes were glassy. "He's going into shock," Galina said, her voice steady but her hands shaking as she tucked the burlap sacks around him. "Grandpa," Katya said, crawling over to him. She took his good hand. It was ice cold. "Grandpa, tell me about the time you met Grandma." Boris smiled faintly, his eyes unfocused. "I did not put a rock in it," Galina corrected, rubbing Boris's chest vigorously to generate heat. "It was hard ice. You deserved it. You were showing off on your motorcycle." Above them, the scratching started again, claws raking against the wooden trapdoor. "They can't get in," Katya said, trying to convince herself. "The wood is oak." "The cold," Boris whispered. He was right. With the barn roof gone, the temperature above the trapdoor was 71 degrees Celsius. The cold radiated down into the cellar like a physical presence, sucking the heat out of their small sanctuary. Hours passed. The candle burned down to a puddle of wax. The scratching above ceased, but the heavy pacing continued. They were the masters of this land. The humans were just trespassers. Katya felt her toes going numb. Her shivering, which had been violent for an hour, was starting to slow down. "I'm sleepy," Boris murmured. His head lolled forward. "No!" Galina slapped his cheek. "No sleeping, Boris. You stubborn old goat. Look at me. Let him sleep, Galia." Boris sighed. "It's warm now." "It's not warm," Katya cried, grabbing his shoulders. "Grandpa, listen to me. Mum is coming. She said she'd call if I didn't text by morning." "Someone is coming." "Morning," Boris breathed. "Is it morning?" Katya looked at the cracks in the floorboards. The light was shifting. It wasn't the silver of the moon anymore. It was the dull, grey-blue of the Arctic dawn. "It's morning," Katya said. "We made it." But making it to morning wasn't enough. They were trapped. If they opened the door, the wolves would kill them. If they stayed, the cold would finish the job within the hour. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence of the tundra. It was faint at first, a low rumble, distinct from the wind. It grew louder, a mechanical growl. "A truck," Galina gasped. The sound grew to a roar. Then, the distinct pop, pop, pop of a heavy rifle echoed from above. The pacing above them turned into a frenzy of scrambling claws. Another shot rang out, then the sound of a heavy engine idling right outside the barn ruins. "Boris! Galina!" a voice boomed from above. It was deep, rough, and the most beautiful sound Katya had ever heard. "Sergei!" Galina screamed up at the trapdoor. "We are here, in the cellar!" Heavy boots crunched on the debris above. The weight of the debris on the trapdoor was heaved aside. The bolt was thrown back, and the door was flung open. Blinding white daylight flooded the hole. Looking down at them was Sergei, their neighbor from 10 miles away, his face wrapped in a fur hat, an AK-47 slung over his shoulder. "Mother of God," Sergei breathed, looking at the carnage in the barn, then down at them. "Get him out," Galina commanded, pointing to Boris. Now, Sergei reached down, his massive arms grabbing Boris by the coat, hoisting the large man out as if he weighed nothing. Katya stepped out into the ruins of the barn. It was a slaughterhouse. The sheep were gone, the roof was gone, but lying in the snow, near the perimeter fence, was the massive grey body of the alpha wolf. Sergei had taken it down with a single shot from the truck window. Katya looked at her grandfather. Sergei was wrapping him in a thermal survival blanket from the truck. Boris was barely conscious, his beard frosted white, his arm hanging limp, but his eyes found Katya's. He didn't speak. He just gave a tiny nod. Katya looked out at the horizon. The sun was rising a pale, distant disk in a sky of white haze. The thermometer on the standing wall of the house still read 68 degrees Celsius. They had lost the sheep. They had lost the barn. But as Katya stood there, the freezing air burning her throat, she realized she felt something burning hotter than the cold. She was alive. And in the coldest place on earth, that was the only victory that mattered. Boris lost 3 fingers to frostbite, and the recovery of his arm took 6 months. Galina never rebuilt the flock. She said she had used up all her luck that night. Katya went back to the city, but she was different. The girl who played piano now carried a jagged scar on her hand from the frozen gun barrel, a permanent reminder of the night the temperature hit -71 and the night she learned that the fire of the human spirit is the only thing that doesn't freeze. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, hit that like button. It helps warm up the algorithm. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a survival story. Share this with someone who thinks 30 degrees is too cold. Stay warm out there, and I'll see you in the next video.